What happens when an entire economy built on decades of trust collapses in just 6 months? And how did Florida's politicians turn their most valuable customers into their biggest economic disaster? The story you're about to discover reveals how political grandstanding destroyed $6.6 billion in annual revenue and left entire communities facing extinction. But the implications reach far beyond state borders, and the final numbers will shock you. February 15, 2025 marked the day when tourism board executives in Tampa received the phone call that changed everything forever. With voices shaking, they delivered news that seemed impossible just months earlier. We just lost the Canadians, all of them. 6 months of political rhetoric had accomplished what hurricanes, recessions, and pandemics never could: complete economic capitulation by Florida's most valuable customer base. The state that built its winter economy on reliable northern neighbors just watched $6.6 billion walk away forever, never to return. The exodus started quietly with booking cancellations, property sales, and rental agreements terminated early across the Sunshine State. What seemed like scattered individual decisions revealed itself as coordinated economic rejection on an unprecedented scale. Canadian seasonal residents weren't taking a temporary break from Florida, they were divorcing the state entirely and permanently. January 2025 brought the first warning signs that rational leadership would have recognized immediately. Rental bookings dropped 31% while property searches plummeted 45% in just 1 month. Airline reservations crashed 38% as Canadians canceled winter travel plans en masse. Any competent government would have recognized the pattern and adjusted course immediately to prevent economic disaster. Instead, Florida politicians decided that doubling down on anti-Canadian rhetoric represented strength rather than catastrophic stupidity. Politicians celebrated symbolic victories while accountants calculated the real economic disaster unfolding across the state. State leadership watched the devastating data and deliberately chose escalation over economics, sealing their fate. The miscalculation destroyed decades of carefully built economic relationships overnight through pure political incompetence. Florida's winter economy operated on a simple principle that politicians fatally misunderstood completely. Reliable seasonal residents who spent substantial money over extended stays generated revenue streams that sustained entire communities through off-peak months. If you're finding this economic disaster as shocking as we are, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're diving deep into economic stories that mainstream media won't tell you, and your support helps us bring you the hard-hitting analysis that shapes our world. Now let's see how this catastrophe unfolded. Canadian Snowbirds epitomized this economic model perfectly, arriving in November and staying through March consistently. They integrated into local communities while maintaining year-round properties and spending patterns that locals depended upon. Politicians assumed this relationship was unbreakable because Canadians needed Florida's weather more than Florida needed Canadian money. The assumption proved catastrophically wrong as empty properties and collapsing tax revenues now document. The numbers behind Florida's self-inflicted economic disaster reveal stunning incompetence at every level of government. $6.6 billion in annual Canadian spending vanished completely in just 6 months of political hostility. Property tax revenue from foreign seasonal residents dropped $2.1 billion as owners liquidated holdings. Winter employment traditionally supported by seasonal visitors disappeared across entire counties, leaving unemployment rates soaring. Service sector jobs in restaurants, retail, and entertainment faced unprecedented layoffs as their primary customer base evaporated overnight. Medical centers that carefully scheduled procedures around seasonal resident patterns now face 60% revenue drops. Canadian Snowbirds routinely planned surgeries, treatments, and specialist consultations during their Florida winters. Dental practices, outpatient centers, and specialty clinics watched patient volumes crater as their most reliable demographics disappeared. The ripple effects extended into every corner of construction industries built around seasonal property maintenance. Canadian owners religiously upgraded, renovated, and improved their Florida properties year after year consistently. Contractors who specialized in snowbird properties now report 70% revenue losses as maintenance contracts vanish. Regional airports designed around seasonal charter flights struggle with massive capacity underutilization problems. Airlines cut routes by 40% as demand disappeared, leaving excess aircraft sitting unused on tarmacs. Car rental agencies positioned fleets for winter surges now face excess inventory and rapidly declining bookings. The entire logistics infrastructure supporting seasonal tourism, unraveled completely within months of the political crisis. Property markets and seasonal communities cratered as fundamental demand disappeared almost overnight completely. Real estate brokers report inventory surges as Canadian owners liquidated their Florida holdings in panic sales. Condos purchased specifically for snowbird rentals became worthless investments when snowbirds stopped coming to Florida. Property values in heavily seasonal areas dropped 30% as sellers flooded markets while buyers vanished. Commercial real estate faced parallel destruction as strip malls, restaurants, and entertainment venues lost their economic foundation. Lease defaults surged as businesses closed permanently rather than operate at unsustainable capacity levels during peak seasons. Local governments watched tax bases evaporate while infrastructure costs remained constant and demanding payment. Municipal bonds still required payment while emergency services still needed funding and road maintenance still demanded resources, but the economic activity supporting these municipal obligations disappeared daily as communities faced financial extinction. International competitors capitalized mercilessly on Florida's political suicide with sophisticated marketing campaigns. Portuguese tourism authorities launched targeted campaigns specifically designed for displaced Canadian snowbirds. Mediterranean coastal cities offered similar climates, superior cultural attractions, and governments that actively welcomed foreign seasonal residents. Mexico streamlined visa processes specifically for Canadian retirees while Caribbean nations coordinated marketing efforts. Every destination learned from Florida's mistakes while benefiting directly from its spectacular political failures. European destinations provided infrastructure. Canadian snowbirds required, including English-speaking services, international banking, and quality medical care. The replacement economics revealed Florida's strategic stupidity in stark mathematical terms that politicians ignored. Canadian seasonal residents averaged $33,000 in household spending across 6-month stays. Domestic tourists averaged only $1,200 per week, long vacation by comparison. Replacing one Canadian household required 28 American families annually, volume that simply doesn't exist. American seasonal residents represented tiny fractions compared to the massive Canadian snowbird population. Domestic second homeowners used properties differently, spending less on local services and integrating minimally into community economies. The economic models didn't translate, the revenue streams couldn't be replaced, and the mathematics guaranteed permanent loss. Political leadership remained completely divorced from economic reality throughout this unfolding crisis. State officials continued defending policies that destroyed billions in economic activity while unemployment rose. Press conferences celebrated America First tourism as tax revenues collapsed and communities faced extinction. Legislative priorities focused on symbolic victories while entire economic sectors disintegrated before their eyes. Bills targeting foreign property ownership advanced while bankruptcy filings surged across tourism-dependent areas. Politicians scored domestic political points while economic sectors collapsed and workers lost their livelihoods. Governor's office statements attributed economic disruption to global market forces, anything except their own policies. Accepting responsibility would contradict core political narratives that drove their decision-making process. So economic reality got ignored while communities suffered and families lost everything they had built. Internal documents leaked to press revealed the true scope of political panic behind their public denials. Tourism Board communications showed desperate industry pleas for policy reversals to prevent complete economic collapse. Private meetings featured stark warnings about economic consequences while public statements continued defending destructive decisions. The disconnect between private reality and public positions guaranteed continued dysfunction at every level. Political incentive structures prevented course correction despite mounting evidence of catastrophic failure. Admitting mistakes would validate opposition criticism while energizing political challengers in upcoming elections. Short-term political survival required maintaining positions that guaranteed long-term economic destruction for entire communities. Industry leaders begged privately for change while supporting officials publicly, ensuring continued economic deterioration. Political necessity overrode economic rationality as the crisis deepened and spread throughout the state. The transformation appears permanent rather than cyclical as infrastructure investments become stranded assets. Buildings, airports, and service networks sized for vanished seasonal populations represent irreversible capital misallocation. Rebuilding trust requires sustained political stability that current leadership simply cannot provide to investors. Seasonal residents who established alternative destinations won't return simply because rhetoric moderates temporarily. Economic relationships once severed through deliberate hostility require years of consistent behavior to rebuild trust. International reputation damage persists beyond policy reversals as competitor destinations maintain structural advantages. Proven stability, superior service, and competitive pricing give alternatives permanent advantages over Florida. Florida weaponized economics against itself through pure political incompetence and ideological commitment. The assumption that Canadian snowbirds needed Florida more than Florida needed Canadian money proved spectacularly wrong. Empty properties, unemployed workers, and collapsing tax revenues document the true cost of political theater. The snowbirds migrated to destinations offering respect alongside sunshine, while their money followed their wings. But the broader implications extend far beyond Florida's borders, as other states watch this economic suicide. They now face their own choice between prioritizing political theater over economic stability. International investors study Florida's collapse as a case study in political risk assessment worldwide. The message spreads globally that American political systems can destroy economic sectors overnight through ideological commitment. Tourism boards worldwide adjust strategies knowing that political hostility trumps economic logic in American decision-making. The ripple effects are just beginning as Florida's tourism infrastructure collapse creates opportunities for every competitor. It serves as a warning for every American state dependent on international visitors and foreign investment. The lesson burns clear that economic relationships built over decades can be destroyed in months. When political theater replaces business sense, communities pay the price with their economic survival. Florida chose ideology over prosperity and achieved neither, leaving behind ghost towns where winter wonderlands once thrived.